Chapter 6. Eloise found Luke in the kitchen. He sat on a stool playing with a handful of dough while Helen bustled around the kitchen. "I don't know how you get him to sit for you," Eloise said. "I feel I spend my whole day keeping him out of trouble." Helen wiped her hands on her apron. "You just have to outthink them. No, baby, don't eat that," she said, gently wiping Luke's chin of the dough he spit out. "You bring him over any time. We'll find something to do together." While Eloise scrubbed the soot off her hands, Luke scrambled off his chair and approached her. "Bye," he said to Helen, but once wasn't enough. "Bye, bye, bye, bye." "Come on, you." Eloise took his hand and led him back through the house, calling her own goodbye to Helen. Zeke was just entering and held the door for her on her way out. She nodded her thanks, but otherwise avoided him. She couldn't believe she had almost cried right in front of him. What was wrong with her today? Who knows what she would have said or done if Jessica hadn't come out when she did? What must he think of her? Thankfully, he would be gone in a few days, and it wouldn't matter. Since she had nothing besides the ironing waiting for her at home, she accompanied Jessica to the post office. Walking through town at a toddler's pace was about as much leisure as she could ask for today. "Well," Jessica said, "he is not what I had in mind. He's sort of skinny, don't you think?" "I hadn't noticed." Eloise had noticed his green eyes and the warmth from his hands as they held hers. She'd noticed his hair was still damp and the strength of his arms when they'd wrapped around her. She'd felt his energy in the easy way he conversed and the way he carried himself. She had noticed many things. Skinny? No, she hadn't noticed that. "His buck teeth are awful," Jessica said. "Gives his whole face a terrible slant. No wonder you ran away." "What?" Eloise was shocked. "His face is perfect." Jessica laughed, and Eloise clicked her tongue, knowing she'd fallen too easily into her friend's trap. "Okay, very funny," Eloise said. "Now will you let it rest? So he's got a great face. So does Tobias, and nobody's making a fuss over him." "I check your facts, ma'am. I know of at least one person who's been taking an interest. You can't ignore Mary Beth any longer, you know. Just accept that they're sparking, and you'll find her to be a very nice girl." I know. Tobias has been incredible about the whole thing, letting me brood about it on my own time. But I should go talk to her soon. She probably thinks I'm an old goat. I just don't know what I'll do with myself when he remarries, when Luke isn't mine anymore. "You think it's inevitable?" "I do. If I know my brother at all, he's completely enamored." "Well, it wouldn't be a sin if you were to smile at a man every now and again. If Tobias remarries, there are other options for you." "There are other ways of living besides marriage." "Oh, yes, very pleasant ways. You can move in with Mother and me and keep house for 10 men instead of 1, and not a one of them will kiss you goodnight." "Fine." Eloise surprised them both. "Fine? Fine what?" "Fine. I will smile." "Oh, my, Eloise, we need to mark this day in the books." Jessica grabbed her arm and pulled her to a stop. "You are aware that this involves making eye contact, yes?" Eloise huffed at Jessica and pulled away. But she thought of Tobias and how often he came home whistling, and the frequent handwritten notes that he thought she didn't see. Her brother was thoughtful of her feelings, but she could not continue to ignore the presence of Mary Beth and the looming truth that he would remarry. Living as a guest in a new sister-in-law's house is not what she wanted. "I will smile and talk politely with the next man we meet. Will that please you?" Jessica stared at her with furrowed brows and gave her a curt nod. "It doesn't count if he's old or ugly." "Not Frank?" "Not Frank." They linked arms and watched Luke march on ahead of them. "Roy?" Eloise asked, smirking at Jessica. "Now you're just being mean. If you dare lay a claim on him, I'll disown you as a friend forever. I know the man is clueless, but one of these days he will look up and see me. And Lord help me if you are in the way." "Everybody sees you, Jess. Do you ever wonder if he's not interested?" "Thus do I pine, Elle. Thus do I pine." Eloise began Shakespeare's sonnet for her. So are you to my thoughts as food to life, or as sweet seasoned showers are to the ground. Jessica sighed. I'm sorry. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do just because I bullied you. But have you considered a certain man who just checked into town? It could be great practice. After all, he's leaving in a few days, so what's a smile and bit of eye contact going to hurt? Eloise surprised them both. He's not old. Jessica smiled. Elle, he's also far from ugly, and besides, you've already marked him. She licked her lips and widened her eyes. That was his fault. Eloise cast her eyes down, hiding her face. Serves him right for barreling out the door like a child. She patted Jess's arm that was linked with hers. Deal's a deal. Grasping Luke's hand firmly, she helped him navigate around a hitching post where he wanted to stop and play. Where did this bravado originate? Her instincts told her to crawl into a hole and never come out, but she yearned to run away and be rid of the chains that dragged her back to the cemetery. She was a prisoner possessing the key to her own cell. It was safe here. Nobody hurt her here. Something about Zeke tempted her to keep the door propped open. Just a little. Just in case. Was it because he had already caught her in a vulnerable situation? Why would that make her feel safe? Eloise broke from Jessica to catch Luke a moment before he walked into the street. No. She pointed a finger at his nose. You will stay with Aunt Ellie. I'll be right back, Jess said over her shoulder and hustled into the post office. Luke stuck out his lower lip and buried his head in Eloise's shoulder.
Zeke rolled his shoulders and reminded himself that he was a grown man. He wasn't used to being coddled. Helen had ushered him into the house and, within minutes, adopted him as another one of her boys, offering him food and showing him a room. She sent him to the brickyard with a basket of cold ham and biscuits to meet the boss. A homelike boarding house was comforting, but if she tried to tuck him in at night, he'd be out the door before morning. Down the street, he saw Chipmunk squatting in front of the toddler, shaking her finger at his nose. He pulled away from her and tried to step into the street. She yanked him back and set him firmly on the boardwalk. He cried and made another run for the street. Miss Palmer came out of the post office and rescued the boy from further discipline. She picked up the child, and when he pointed to the street, she took him there, allowing him to choose a few pebbles before joining his mother, who stood with hands on her hips, shaking her head. When Miss Palmer saw Zeke, she pointed him out to the others and waved. Evidently, the apple didn't fall far. He'd only spent a few moments with her and her mother, but there was no mistaking her energetic personality traits, joyful abandon. Her smile was big enough to show all her teeth, and her wave would have signaled him a mile away. What interesting people there are here. Miss Palmer called out to him as he neared.
Hello again.
She was exuberant, and yet it failed to hold his attention. He found quiet chipmunks much more interesting at present. Mrs. Davidson's soft demeanor was in stark contrast to her friend's. She returned his smile and cast her eyes down, her cheeks turning pink. He'd need to be careful with this one. He glanced at the gold band on her finger to remind himself.
Mr. James, I see my mother is sending you with a peace offering. I'd recognize that tea towel anywhere.
She handed Luke over as he lunged for his mother.
Off to meet Boss?
Please, call me Zeke. He tipped his hat to the ladies. I am on my way to the brickyard, yes. Does the man not have a name? You're the fourth this morning to mention him. One whisper of the brickyard and me needing work, and all I hear is boss, boss, boss. It makes me wonder what I'm getting into. Chipmunk laughed at his question, a soft sound, and hitched the boy higher on her hips.
You've nothing to worry about,
Miss Palmer answered.
Eloise and I call him Tobias, but to many around town, even those he doesn't employ, he's boss.
Miss Palmer hardly stopped for a breath.
He took over the brickyard at 19, took over for his father after he died. We had a great many die that year of a terrible fever. Anyhow, the name started as a joke since he was so young, but when he filled the role better than they bargained for, it stuck. We're used to it now.
I was strapped to a plow in Iowa at 19. The oxen didn't even listen to me. I'm lucky if my horse listens to me." The toddler wanted down. She let him, but held tightly to his hand. He tugged at her, walking in front and then behind. Chipmunk easily transferred her hands on his as he walked circles around her. He hid his face in her skirts and then peered at Zeke, playing his own game of peekaboo. Zeke squatted in front of the boy. "And what's your name? I'm Ezekiel James, but my friends call me Zeke."
"This is Luke,"
Chipmunk said.
"He's not yet 2, but he sure keeps us hopping."
"Hello, Luke." Zeke offered his hand. Luke held out a fist to Zeke, showing what was in his hand.
"Rock,"
he said before he swung his arm back and threw it at Zeke's face.
"Oh, Luke, no!"
Chipmunk yanked Luke backward and pulled him into her arms. Her face flushed red. She scolded Luke for his behavior, all the while avoiding eye contact with Zeke. Luke fidgeted in her arms, fighting to be put down. Zeke only laughed, rubbing his forehead. "It's all right, Mrs. Davidson. Sometimes first impressions are hard to forget." She flashed her eyes at him in warning, which only made him laugh harder. She jutted out her chin and pierced him with a glare, as if he were the misbehaving toddler, and added a subtle shake of her head. Miss Palmer raised her eyebrows, but if she and Chipmunk were as good of friends as he guessed, she would soon hear the whole story, if she hadn't already. Girls were like that. Nothing was kept quiet for long. "Ladies, good day to you." He grinned. It shouldn't be this much fun, or easy, to make her blush.
"We'll walk with you."
Miss Palmer made eyes with Mrs. Davidson.
"Right, Elle? We have nothing else urgent. Besides, Luke likes to watch the boys work and see his dada."
Mrs. Davidson avoided Zeke. He knew he ought to decline. He'd made her blush enough for one day. Especially if Mr. Davidson was apparently at the brickyard, too. "I'm sure I can find my way."
"Nonsense,"
Miss Palmer said.
"It's no trouble at all. In fact, we were going to Elle's house, and it's practically on the way. Eloise, don't you agree?"
Her direct statement could not be ignored. Chipmunk tore her face from the toddler, but her eyes still didn't quite meet his. It was comical. Would they ever move on from that first encounter? Not if I don't stop bringing it up. And it didn't matter. He was leaving in a few days, as long as he stayed out of trouble with her husband before then.
"Of course,"
Chipmunk said.
"We'd love to go with you."
But she turned and walked away with Luke's hand in hers. Miss Palmer fell in line next to him, and the four slowly made their way through the edge of town. Their pace was set by toddler legs. Miss Palmer pointed out everything of possible interest. She told him the names of the shop owners, what items were sold where, and the best places to get what. She even told him interesting snippets about those they passed along the way. Her chatter, though lively, did not interest him. He absently watched the way Luke held tight 2 of Mrs. Davidson's fingers. He watched her thumb rub the back of his chubby hand. If Miss Palmer weren't here, would she have stopped to talk to him again? She had friends, she had a son, and she appeared to be in good health. He wondered why she was so reserved. Maybe he was reading more into the situation than he should have. Replaying their earlier conversations, he felt sure she would be easy to converse with if she would relax. Why did he get the feeling there was more to be discovered? Once, he and Rachel were out exploring along the back acres of the forest when they'd discovered a cave. It wasn't big, and it didn't go far, but it was enough for a 14-year-old boy to feel like he'd found something worth finding. They'd excitedly shown it to Rachel's younger siblings, and over the next few years it had been filled with a number of playthings, including cracked cups and grass-woven rugs. The boys had gathered large rocks for seats and marked the walls with chalk, and the girls kept it decorated with flowers and what-not. After he and the Donnelly family moved to Iowa, they talked fondly of that cave and hoped more children would find it, especially since they had left it fully furnished. He wondered if animals had taken residence there before children reclaimed it. He realized Miss Palmer had stopped talking. He glanced at her. She raised her eyebrows at him, expecting an answer. What had she asked? "Where are you from?" "West Virginia," he answered, relieved she hadn't caught him too distracted. She smiled and nodded.
"Of course."
Suddenly she called ahead.
Elle, I need to borrow Luke. I promised we'd look at the toy trains. We'll catch up.
She snatched Luke and walked into the apothecary, leaving the two of them stranded outside. Zeke stood for a moment, unsure of what to do. He had the urge to offer his arm, but knew that was inappropriate. How did one walk through town with a married woman that you saw in her unmentionables yesterday? You don't, Zeke. You run away. She reached a hand toward the basket he carried.
May I?
This? I won't have a lady troubling herself on my account. He resumed walking nonchalantly, swinging his arms as if it were the most natural thing for a grown man to be carrying a feminine basket down the street. Neither of them spoke for a while. Anyhow, purple is growing on me, he eventually said, breaking the silence that Miss Palmer had not allowed. Chipmunk matched his stride, making up time now that they weren't hobbled by a toddler. Above, a hawk floated on the high winds, searching for breakfast, or perhaps out for fun.
Lavender,
she said. Lavender what?
the tea towel.
She motioned to the basket.
Lavender, not purple.
This isn't purple? He raised the basket, holding it with both hands in front of him.
No.
He watched her, undecided if she was trying to pick a fight or making a joke. He couldn't see her face. The bonnet did its job very well. Light purple, then. Would that be fair?
I'd allow it.
She said.
But it's risky. Would you say pink is a light red?
He laughed. Risky's okay with me. I'm an adventurer, after all. Stifled laughter came from her, ending in a muffled snort when she covered her mouth with her hands. This was not the same blushing chipmunk he'd run into this morning. Her burst of humor surprised him. But that bonnet, why did she insist on hiding her face? He skipped ahead and walked backward to face her. A smirk still lingered, though she cast her eyes away from his. What's so funny? He kept up his backward stride.
Do most adventurers make a habit of tumbling headfirst into creeks?
Aha! They do, when accosted by fair maidens armed with all manner of pebbles. And babies. She flashed him a smile.
Do most adventurers lose their way and require directional assistance of fair maidens?
Could be. How many adventurers have you met? He tripped and high-stepped into a backward jog to cover for it. She rolled her eyes at him, a childish gesture that made him laugh.
Turn around. I don't want to watch you fall again.
He did, though he missed her face. There was much more to her than she let on in her words. It was hard to read her without seeing her face.
So, West Virginia?
She asked. Born and raised.
Do most adventurers leave their bags in West Virginia?
He was stumped. What? No, I left my things in the stall next to Susie Girl.
Jessica asked where you left them since you didn't have anything with you when you checked in. You said they were in West Virginia.
He smacked his palm to his forehead. I didn't.
You did.
She turned her face to his and smiled.
I gather you're the easily distracted type of adventurer?
You've pegged me.
Mr. James, how did...
Zeke, he said.
Very well.
The boardwalk ended as they left the square and continued through town. He held the basket in the crook of his arm and peeked into it, digging under the towel. How did I what?
I don't remember.
He smiled. Now who's distracted, Chipmunk? They were still walking down Main Street, but had left the shops behind. Miss Palmer and Luke were nowhere to be seen. An easy companionship had started to grow, and he yearned for more. Zeke felt something new, a fullness he hadn't experienced in a long time. He took a deep breath and smiled. This was what life could be like. He'd almost forgotten how enjoyable it was to simply be with someone, to banter over silly things for no purpose other than the pleasure of the company. Granted, they'd only just met. First or second impressions could be deceiving, but he liked her. And not just because he found her in the creek. There was a lot to like there, too, but that wasn't the half of it. He wanted to ask her everything, and tell her everything. Married, he remembered like a cannon going off in his head. Married, married, married. Off limits. She belonged to someone else. She had a child with someone else, for goodness sake. Zeke stretched the space between them. He swung the basket there to be sure it stayed that way, and they made their way out of the heart of town. The beehive-killed chimneys appeared over the next rise. "I've never worked at a brickyard before. Any tips?"
It's a dirty job. Brickmakers and blacksmiths both keep a girl busy doing laundry.
She turned serious.
Boss is fair, but he doesn't miss a thing. You shouldn't have any trouble if you are honest and put in your share of work. Don't expect to be able to keep up with the others when you start out, but he knows it takes time to learn. You'll need a good pair of gloves.
Gloves, check. Anything else?
Dee will show you the ropes, I'm sure. He's the foreman, the one you'll need to answer to most of the time. You'll get to dig clay from a pit, and in a few weeks, if you want to try something else, you can ask for it if they don't put you on another rotation.
There's no need. A few weeks is plenty. I'm chasing the setting sun, if you've forgotten. Go west, young man. That's me.
West for what?
She sounded disappointed, but surely he was mistaken. Why ever not? The west is as good as here. Better, even.
Oh.
One word. And yet, this single-worded statement unsettled him. An elegant speech highlighting the pitfalls of his plan wouldn't have had the same impact. What was she to him? Nothing. That's what she was. Nothing. She had no right to tell him he couldn't go west if he wanted to. The Donnellys had cared for him and taken him in, but he did not wish to spend the rest of his life strapped to the back of a pair of oxen or any other animal trained to plow a field. His rows were never straight because his focus was everywhere but the end of the line. He had dreams, talents, and ideas. He wasn't strapped to a family, a horse, a job, nothing. It was his life, his choice. He'd go where he wanted, and that was that. He didn't need another girl to tie him down. He didn't need someone else to cry and tell him he was reckless, foolhardy, or too ambitious. Rachel already filled that role. A married woman, no matter how intriguing, had no reason to tell him he was a fool. So he was easily distracted. So he lost his way a few times. That's why it was such a blessing to be alone. He didn't mind a few extra days or weeks or months. He was only interested in the adventure to be found along the way. He pushed like a fish against the net around him, always searching for a break in the ropes, for a hole that would let him back out into the open. "Here," he shoved the basket into her arms.
"Ope?"
she said. "I can find my way from here. Don't need to give anyone ideas about us. Be seeing you." He stalked along the worn path, alone. It was better this way. A grown man didn't need to feel guilty for making his own way in the world, and he sure didn't need to be escorted to work. Chipmunk, Mrs. Davidson, he chided himself, could go back to whatever it was young mothers did, like swimming in frigid creeks.
Eloise stood with the basket in her hands. What had she possibly done to upset him? She should have known better than to play games. To what gain? He would never be interested in her anyway, not that she wanted him to be. Letting Jessica get to her was a mistake. Zeke was no different than any other man. Honestly, had she not learned her lesson by now? Men would never be interested in anything she had to offer. She hadn't been enough for Philip, even after years of courtship and then marriage. Making deals with Jessica was silly. She hadn't expected Zeke to fawn over her, but she hadn't prepared for a full rejection. Jessica's escape with Luke threw her off guard. Though it was humorous listening to Jessica chatter to Zeke about the town. He'd listened politely to all of it, but she'd kept herself safely out of the conversation. That word again. Safe. What was she afraid of? Being noticed? It was easier to let Jessica do the talking. No, it went deeper than that. What if she was noticed and found lacking? What if she found love and it wasn't returned? That would be worse yet. If she wasn't enough for Philip, to whom she had given everything, what's to say any man would be satisfied with her? If she hadn't been enough to keep him here, there was nothing more she had to offer. Jessica had rattled on about everything, and Zeke did not contribute. He hadn't been mute with Eloise when they'd walked earlier. Then again, she left room for him. She'd bitten her tongue to keep from laughing out loud when Jessica asked him where he stored his things, and he'd said, West Virginia. After Jessica scuttled off with Luke, Eloise kept to her pact. She smiled. She talked. She'd surprised herself with the ease of companionship with him. It hadn't been a toilsome task after all. Zeke didn't mind moments of silence. He was clever and good-humored, until he wasn't. A lot of good the effort had been. Here she stood on the outskirts of town, alone, watching the back of his shirt disappear down the hill. Stupid shirt. Men were impossible. She felt jilted, a cast-off from yesterday's bouquet. Next time he fell off a creek bank, she'd let him lie in his own mess. What did she care if he dismissed her so easily? He was nothing to her. Nothing. Just a silly man with a silly, stupid wink. Except he'd woken something in her she hadn't realized she'd buried. A yearning for companionship. She missed Philip terribly. "You'll just have to trust me." Zeke's words ran through her mind from that morning. Hardly. She didn't even trust herself most days. She'd find Luke, and they would eat Zeke's lunch, thanks to Helen. Mr. Ezekiel James could fend for himself. Jessica was the best of friends. She had been a support through all of life's troubles and the first to share in the good. But sharing a joke with Zeke had caused a stirring of excitement that fluttered in her middle. The newness of a possible friendship, a gut feeling that they shared something, a hidden treasure, a connection. But no, it was better this way. She was better off alone.